Pittsburgh Steelers fans, welcome to this week's episode of Steelers Touch Down Under. I'm Matt Peverell. I'm the solo host of this week's show. Marky Davison, Marky D, is unwell, unfortunately, and the rest of my BTSC colleagues are all off enjoying their weekend and doing their thing and tied up. So I thought I'd join you guys live directly. It's going to be an action-packed show. Look, we might go shorter. We might go the full length of the show. We'll just have to see how you all are enjoying it. Now, please let me know in the comments, if for those of you that are listening live on YouTube or Facebook, let me know if you're having any audio difficulties, but I think we've sorted everything out from last week. But super pumped for this week's show, super pumped. We're going to be talking, I'm flying solo, obviously, and we're going to be talking Steelers goals for this season. So I'm flying solo before the Steelers go. It's going to be awesome. Definitely feed in. I'll give you those prompts as well. Really, really excited for this one. You know, it's for some of you that listen on the audio side, or you might be listening on the audio side of this week's show, and you know, on whether it's Spotify, Pandora, might be Apple iTunes, whatever it is. You know that I do the Steelers War Room as well. So you know, this has been interesting for me to do the live YouTube version of it, but you know, I've got the live chat here. I've got the family. I've got the guys like Michael O'Malley and, you know, Shield 91 and Ryan O'Toole and Chad's in there and Dave Tiderback. You know, George Teston's in there. Kathy's in there too. So we've got the women of BTSC in the family as well. So everyone's joining us, and it's fun to be with you all. But yeah, let me know if you're having any audio issues, and also if you can hear me all right, I can turn up the sensitivity of my microphone. But before we crack into this week's show, I wanted to address, we always like to call ourselves the BTSC family. Now this week, one of the Steelers players lost one of their family members in Stephon Tuitt, his brother, who sadly, passed away through a hit and run accident. So our condolences go out to Stephon Tuitt, massive player for the Pittsburgh Steelers, massive season from him last year with 11 sacks. But more importantly, you know, he's just a great personality. So a contributor to that locker room. He's a favorite player for me. Wears the number for the year I was born. So, you know, he's always going to be a favorite there. And, you know, I've always been a big fan of him. But yeah, condolences to the Tuitt family. And, you know, and we know the way the Steelers rallied around, you know, each other when Coach Drake passed. They'll do the same thing for Stephon Tuitt. So, you know, you can imagine that he's going to dedicate a lot of his performance in this upcoming season to his brother. And that bodes well for us as Pittsburgh Steelers fans, but obviously a very sad loss that's had to come with that. Also, what I wanted to do was that last week when we had all those audio difficulties and connection difficulties, and we think we've worked out what they were, and obviously it doesn't look like we're having them this week, which is fantastic. And I'm on a much more powerful computer now as well. But there was a really great question that was asked, and it was a super chat from Shield, and he said, you know, which two BTSC colleagues or team members would you want to go to a Pittsburgh Steelers game with? And I know Bad talked about this as well. I think it was on the 2 a.m. or a hangover as well. But I didn't get to answer the question. And it was a tough question at the time, but I did really get thinking about it. And so I'm going to give a bit of a cop-out answer for some people. And that's, you know, I'd like to go in pairs with people. So rather than just picking two BTSC colleagues, I'd like to go in pairs with different people. So I was thinking, you know, it might be Dave and Rich, you know, so definitely have that Scobro experience live. You might have Bad and Tony. So, you know, what can we enjoy a win and get hungover if you like, you know, and it sounds like both of them in their day too would, you know, like a bit of a drink and, you know, a bit of enjoy that game. So that's, you know, something you could have fun with. And then Jeffrey and KT Smith. Can you imagine going to a game with Jeffrey and KT Smith? So that's Jeffrey Benedict. It'd be like being in a coach's box. You know, they'd be telling you all the plays before they happen and analyzing who's coming in and the pre-snap motions and all the rest of it. I'd absolutely love it. And it'd be fun to hear what they're both seeing because they have their different pieces as well. And they, you know, they're very respectful of each other and the different, you know, film study and what KT brings to it from a coach's perspective. So that could be really cool. And then you can't forget Michael Beck and Jeff Hartman. Can you imagine the deputy editor with the first editor, you know, now co-editor, the bants, the puns, the shade, and the loads of laughs that would come out of that. So yeah, that would be an awesome pairing as well. So with those four duos, you know, and, you know, more than 8 to 9 home games and 17 game schedule, you could get 2 doses of these. So, you know, that would be pretty interesting for me if I could do that. But man, for me to get 4 games over there in the States at one time, even outside of COVID, that'd be a pretty difficult thing, but a pretty awesome thing at the same time. So let's jump into this week's show. And yep, it's getting a bit hot where I am, even though it's just starting to get really cool outside. So take that jacket off, that Steelers jacket. Now, I talked about goals for this, and that being what we're going to really talk about in this week's show. So what I've done is I've gone through and looked at a few different things. And with each of these, I want you to tell me too, as I give you the goal, for what it needs to be and your thoughts on it too. So as I say, always live chat, please jump in. For all of you on the audio side, I'll do my best to sort of integrate that in there for you. But let's kick off with the defense. We'll look to tackle probably the defense in part 1, and then we can look at the offense in part 2, and then I've got a fun little game for everyone as well. Of course, we're going to have Sling and the Slang. We never not have Sling and the Slang. That's our Aussie segment as part of Steelers Touch Down Under. All right, let's kick it off. So, on the defense, I went through and I had a look. And did you know that only twice in the past 30 seasons, going back to 1992, have the Steelers had a better ranked defense as in 2020, when ranked by points allowed, yards, and turnover ratio? So that being 2020, we had such a great defense, and it was really the offense that let that down. And it's not just a fact that we say because we see the splash plays and the sacks and the interceptions and the forced fumbles and the tackles for losses. But it was true. Only 2 times in the last 30 seasons have we had better statistical rankings. That was in 2010, when we ranked number 1 in points allowed, number 1 in yards, and second in turnover ratio. So that being the turnovers that we were forcing the other team to have were much higher than ours. And then in 2004 as well. So that was, again, ranked first in points allowed, first in yards, and 5th in turnover ratio. Now, in perspective too, in 2019, the Steelers, that great defense that we saw emerge once they got Minka, and obviously there were the 3 games before that, they were a bit of a challenge, and the Patriots blew them out by plus 30, in week 1 before Ben did his elbow, in that week 2 game against the Seattle Seahawks. But they were 5th in points allowed, 5th in yards allowed, and 7th in turnover ratio. So, and obviously the turnover ratio is going to be hard when you've got Devlin Duck Hodges and you've got Mason Rudolph there. So, I think for the Steelers, when we look at those sorts of stats, the goal really needs to be match what you did in 2020. Match what you did in 2020. Or let's get to the 2010 mark. So the next part, that I wanted to look at was Steven Nelson. Now, you sort of know why, Matt. Like, we cut Steven Nelson, he's old news, what have you. But he gets pretty vocal. Like, he's always doing these live Instagram videos. They're coming up. He's still available on the free agent market. People are a bit concerned about our cornerback room, even though we've done very well, I think, from an undrafted free agent perspective. I talked a little bit about that in the last couple of war rooms. But you want to know why Steven Nelson got released and why he hasn't gone anywhere? Yes, there was the expectations of the contract number. But that was backed by the fact that he allowed, and this was the second highest for the team, 414 yards allowed through the air and 318 yards after the catch, which was the most yardage allowed, by the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. In fact, the yards after the catch was double Cam Sutton. Now, Cam Sutton, I think, only had 58 targets, whereas, Nelson had 98 targets, and he allowed 732 yards off the pass there. Hayden was the highest off the air, yards allowed through the air, and he was targeted 79 times. But we know Joe Hayden gets more interceptions. We know Hayden plays a bit of a different role there, and we know that Hayden's role is, to be a bit more disruptive, to be a bit more free-flowing. So for me, there's a goal there in Cam Sutton. For me, he's cheaper. I actually think he can do a bit more with a bit more, allowance and a bit more play time. So I'm interested to see, can he basically allowed no more than 650 yards. That would be an 80-yard improvement on Steven Nelson. So that'd be a 10%, improvement on Steven Nelson for a lot less money, straight up. Now, hopefully that's even under 600. And I bring up Steeler Chick, her goal, for this season so far for for 2021 for the defense is to stay healthy all season. Agree. Number 1, that's got to be the goal, but that's going to be really, really difficult. But when I think of staying healthy, I think that's out of your top 5 or 6 players on defense, no one being out for more than 2 or 3 games. I think we can confine. There's going to be niggles along the way. There's going to be people that I do think now there's the 17th game that that concept of managing snaps. I don't necessarily resting players, but I think managing snaps is definitely something that coaches are going to start thinking about. You've seen it in many different sports as well. So when different extensions added to games, when people know they're making playoffs, when playoffs are extended, when games have been added to rounds of playoffs, and what have you there. It's a long season. So then the next piece that I really wanted to look at was Alex Highsmith and Quincy Roche. So a lot of the BTSC shows this week have talked on the audio and YouTube side, have talked about the role of Highsmith, and the opportunity that he's going to have this year, replacing Bud Dupree. But I want you to get excited about Quincy Roche. We talked about being really healthy on defense just before. The trick to that is going to be Quincy Roche. It's not going to be the Pokemon King or the Pokemon King in Cassius Marsh. It's going to be Quincy Roche, and I still think they should go out and look at a veteran, which we've talked about in War Room and the different, I know Michael Beck's talked about some of them as well, as have several other BTSC, audio side and guys that go on the written side at behindstillgurton.com, your one-stop shop for all things Pittsburgh Steelers. But I think Highsmith, even like I was high on him throughout the season. You can ask Mark, on next week's show. But when Mark and I started chatting and planning, the potential to become BTSC podcasters, Highsmith just kept coming up in the conversation. I'm such a big fan of him. And so with that, I was really interested in what he did in the college game. But when we went back to Roche, and obviously I've talked a lot about Roche, the Q from the U since we drafted him. I was able to, talk about that pick live as part of that roundtable, and such a big fan of him. But the cool thing about Highsmith and Roche is they both played 45 games in college. So you've got some comparisons you can be made there. Now, I pulled this up quite quickly, so I didn't get to get the pressures, which I wanted to, because I think Roche had something like 50 quarterback pressures. But if you look at 45 games, Highsmith had 185 tackles. He had 47 tackles for a loss. This is all in college. 21 sacks, 5 pass defenses, and 4 forced fumbles. We took him in round 3 out of Charlotte. Roche, ex-Temple, ex-Miami. Roche also played those 45 games, as I said, 182 tackles, so 3 different, 54 tackles for a loss, 30 and a half sacks, so he's got almost 30, over 30% more sacks there. And then you've also got there 7 pass defenses and 8 forced fumbles. If you don't think, and he was rumored to be that 3rd or 4th round. Now, if you look at that college, production, and obviously stats don't tell the full picture, but you look at that college production there, and Roche didn't play that much in 2020. I think there was only about, I think it was 8 or 10 games that were played. But, for Miami there, this is someone to be excited about. And it's not about, Highsmith will obviously have that number 1 shot on the right side, and that makes sense. And I do want to see Highsmith develop there. But we've got Roche as well. It means that we can ease TJ and manage his snaps. We can allow him to be healthy. He can, and this is the thing as well. If you put Roche on the field opposite Highsmith, they're going to go to Highsmith. Roche's got, a lot of moves. He doesn't just rely on that speed. So I'm really interested in what Roche can do this season. I think there's going to be a really big impact about it. I've talked about it, but I now got the opportunity this week to go look into it and to dive deeper into it, being flying solo this week. So I think for Roche, the goal this season really needs to be around matching what Highsmith did last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers and exceeding it as well. We had low expectations, I think, there of Highsmith, and Dupree came in. Now, we obviously want Roche not to have to come in and play that bulk of the snaps. We don't want an injury to TJ. We don't want an injury to Alex Highsmith. But if Roche can get the same sort of number of snaps throughout the season, because he's not having to play 4 games fully, but we're able to distribute the load, that's going to bode really well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I'm really excited. And I think that, earlier on in the live chat, someone, I think there mentioned that, I think it was Ryan O'Toole, what gets defensive player of the year that he's deserved for a while. 100%. He should have been the defensive player in 2019. There was robbed there. I think he was robbed as well last year, but that felt more, I was more comfortable with that than 2019. what needs to be fresh, what needs to, not being held and strangled every game. So a lot of what getting defensive player of the year is going to come down to some of the refereeing to a degree. But yeah, my goal there is for Roche to sort of be able to match Highsmith's production and match those number of snaps because we're being able to rest him. Daddy says TJ comes off the field a lot. Yeah, I just think that the more we can be selective about it, and even the choice to bring him off makes a big difference as well. Also, how can you rotate them? What can you do from a 4-3 perspective, with Roche and Highsmith, and what can you do in sub packages? Can Highsmith step back and then, you can allow Roche and what to go pressure the quarterback. I think there's just flexibility that you can do by having a guy with the capabilities of Roche. Now, the next one comes from a bit of an Aussie saying and that we have here, and I think it's kind of worldwide. It's definitely a cricket saying. It sounds like it's probably a baseball saying, which is saving a run in the field, saves a run, you've got to score. So that goes down to missed tackles. Now, when I went through the missed tackles last year, and that's for players in more than 50 snaps, Brooks, Marsh, Lane, Hilton, and Mondeau had the highest percentage of missed tackles. If we look at those guys, I think, obviously we've lost Hilton and he did a lot there, in coming down in that run support and, the short passing game. But they're four guys, as far like taking Hilton out, they're four guys that, in my perspective, are fighting for, their time. And I think there's an article right up now on BTSC, some players that are fighting for their careers this off season. But, and obviously Brooks was, he played very few snaps. So when he's in this percentage, it's, you've got to be considerate of that sort of perspective. But I think when it comes to Marshall, Lane, and Mondeau, if they're missing tackles at the same sort of rate in the preseason, or they look like they're going to, it's it's out of here. We can't afford to miss tackles. Missed tackles turn into massive plays at yards after the catch. They break a defensive formation. And so for me, that's a big concern. Missed tackles, and there's no excuse with that. It's something that we poll a lot in the rugby sports, and it's really, really important. Now, Awesome Stuff's asked a really great question. There's a lot of questions on offense. I'm getting to the defense. We will get there, but we can definitely, address that one. So next I wanted to, and Thaddeus has brought up a really good point right now in rushing, and that's something we will be talking about in offense. So the next piece that I wanted to sort of tackle was around QB hurries. So last year, our top 5 guys were Watt with 19, Hayward with 12, Dupree with 12, Tuitt with 10, and Highsmith with 6. So that's quarterback hurries. Now, that's where the pressures are a bit different. The hurries are where you see them force a throw or force an incompletion. I think that's a really interesting point there, and it's different with a pass defense. And something that it's one of those stats. If you are big into your stats, whatever, you can go to Pro Football Reference, right? And you've got the stats that everyone measures. So on defense, you might have interceptions, forced fumbles, sacks, what have you. Then you can go to the advanced defense. And that's really important when you're looking at defensive backs. And, you can look at Nelson, you can look at how many yards were given up and what were that, not just air and yak, but you can look at what was the average distance between where they were to the target and, in percentages and all the rest of it. And it gets quite interesting. And for the guys that play those more linebacker and defensive line positions, one of these is these QB hurries that you can look at. And I think that's really important because you're not going to be able to – the QB hurry is a good one in that if you've got TJ Watt on one side, for example, and then you've got Highsmith on the other side, and people are focusing on Watt, and then Highsmith starts to break loose, but you like, oh no, I've got to always think about, TJ Watt on that left side. That's where you can sort of measure the status or the impact that a top player has. And you can see that when I talk about Watt, Hayward, Dupree, Tuitt. Now, and Steeler Chicks brought up right now, just to think about how many sacks TJ Watt wasn't held so much. The first start of the season, I was like, oh yeah, he's being held a bit. But you started to see it as the weeks rolled on, particularly the middle sort of 4 or 5 games of the season. And it's like, holy cow, like what are they doing? They have to call this. It got absolutely ridiculous. Like his neck, I can't, he must have been icing his neck the whole, after post game because man, like the amount of headlocks he had in there. But in 2021, I would like to see the goal being that Highsmith replaces Dupree's 12, and you should think that that's possible with the 6 that he had, that he's playing a lot. He's going to be playing a lot more games and starting a lot more games as well. I would love to see 5 people make sure they're above that 10, not 4. And I want to see Bush in that top 10 too. I want to see them being able to allow Bush to do a bit of free roaming too by having some interesting, dime backers and what have you. But really, I'd love to see 3 guys go over 15 too. So can Tuitt upgrade to being, 15 QB hurries? Can Watt match that with 19 or 20? Can Hayward just tick that up a notch? I think these things are really important because if we can do this, this will really help elevate this defense that bit further. And again, it will help us down the stretch. It will be a lot more intimidating for opposing offenses coming in to play the Pittsburgh Steelers. Ryan O'Toole says he was criminally held on virtually every play. An Eagle actually laid on Watt during that game. Yeah, that was ridiculous, that game. There was some, and I think against might have been the Broncos as well. There was just this, it's in front of the referee too half the time. I can't understand it. It really revs me up. So we talked about, I think Thaddeus said in there just before as well, dead last in rushing hurts the defense because you can't control the clock. Exactly. So when I looked at rushing yards allowed as well, it's on the flip side. So we'll cover what the rushing offense needs to do when we talk about offense. But the rushing yards allowed are also a problem for the Pittsburgh Steelers because that puts that time pressure. That puts, the sand, flips that sand, and you've got to start thinking about, hey, you're going to score points quickly if you're down. Now, especially if Big Ben throws a couple of interceptions. Now, I thought he was really good through the season last year. But you see it in a playoff game when it doesn't work, right? We saw that last year in the wild card round with the Browns. We saw that a few years ago with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So last year we allowed over 100 yards in 10 of our 17 games, if you include that wild card game. And that doesn't include the 2 games of 80-plus yards. In 2021, our goal needs to be only 8 games over 100 and 4 of those only 125. Now, I think there was something like 4 or 5 over 150 yards in 2020. So we need to tighten that rush defense as well because, that's a difficult proposition when you're playing 2 games against the Baltimore Ravens, right? And they've only gotten better in the run game with the acquisition of Ben Mason as a fullback. Right now, and they've lost Mark Ingram, fine. But, Lamar will be back. You've got, of course, and they're back with a vengeance to prove himself. You've got J.K. Dobbins. I think they brought in a couple of other guys as well. You've got Gus Edwards still there. They've got wide receivers that they can get into the sweep games and what have you. They've got guys like Mark Andrews as well. So they're going to be really interesting. Equally, and Vodka Drinker brings it up. Bud Dupree was great at defending the run. And I think when you look at the photos of Highsmith, and it sounds from what he's been doing in OTAs, he's coming in to help with that run. So it's really interesting. I think Bush and Williams being back together, and hopefully they can stay healthy, that will be really big to stopping the run. I think there's interesting pieces with the slot corner that they can have. And I mean, Shakur Brown could be quite an upgrade on Mike Hilton as well. So that could be really, really interesting from that perspective. But what I was going to say was, that rush defense, we really need, allowing only for 4 games around 25 yards, and not just the Ravens, it's the Browns as well. The Browns have got Chubb and Hunt. How do we control those guys? And when Mark and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about AFC North players and the challenge that they are, that was one thing I really focused in on and we talked about, because it is such a challenge. It tires out your defense, and that's why having a number of good, inside linebackers is really important. So it's fantastic that we brought back Vinny Vitavici for cheap. It's getting Bush back, having Spillane and Buddy Johnson as your backups there, having Marcus Allen. I'm not the biggest fan of Marcus Allen, but if he's going to be around, he's got some speed and he can follow those guys as well. And he's got speed for a linebacker. I don't necessarily think so for a secondary player. So I think, this is a really exciting one for the Steelers, and what they can do this season, but that has to be fixed because that will allow us more time on the clock to do what we need to do, to not be forced into making hurried decisions. But look, well, I might take a break from the statistical and the goals side of things, so I might jump over to Sling and the Slang before we go to the break. This show's gone super quick. I've got this fun sort of game or questions for you. So I'm really actually happy. I'm pretty on schedule for where I needed to be to get through everything and allow lots of questions at the end. So that's awesome. But at the same time, I'm missing my co-host in Marky D. So, slinging the slang. As we always like to say, just like Big Ben likes to sling the rock, we like to sling the slang and give you all these Aussie perspectives and, or whether it's words or whether it's sayings or whether it's, things or funny animals or what have you. So the first one that I'm going to, the first slinging the slang word for this week is solo. Now we're going to play a bit of trivia quickly. So what does the word in Australia solo mean? Now, yes, it means, what we're saying in the live chat, like going it alone and what have you, but also solo is a name that represents something in Australia. So A, is it a type of marsupial? B, is it a type of fizzy drink? C, is it a type of chocolate bar? Or D, is it someone that has no friends? Dun, 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 dun. All right, you've probably got your answer in your head there. No one's thrown into the live chat, so we'll see. Volker Drinker says drinking cup. Right on point. That's fantastic. I love that. That's great. Mark, I don't know. Michael O'Malley's just got a beer sign. I think that is. That's hilarious. Drinking alone. There we go. I think it's that one. No, solo is actually a fizzy drink. It's like Thaddeus has got it there. It's Kathy Ford, Solo Cup. There's a great country song. I don't know if anyone listens to country music. I like a lot of American country music. It makes me think of tailgating, and I'm a Texas Longhorns fan in the college game, and it makes me think of my time in Austin and what have you. But Red Solo Cup, and it's one that we put on actually a lot. My fiance really loves it as well. But no, it's actually B. It's a soft drink. It's like a lemon squash, so a bit different from like a lemonade, or might be more like a traditional lemonade, for what you guys have over there with that classic lemonade store. So that's what Solo is. And they even made a green one that's because it's like a yellowy color and it's a lime. There's a stack of sugar in it though. So yeah, you can have, when you have that as a kid, you generally bounce off the walls. So it's one that, your parents sort of ration out to you and you have it at barbecues, and it's really Aussie from that perspective. Well, I think it's owned by Schweppes now anyway. And then so the next one I wanted to bring up was the saying, good on ya. Good on ya. Now, we probably won't have any guess on that because it seems pretty obvious. But the interesting about good on ya is that, like, you could do something, really, really great. You could get a promotion, or you could, throw 3 or 4 TDs and you'd be like, good on you, mate. Or you can actually say it really sarcastically too. So if someone's, bragging or boasting or someone's telling you how great they are, or they're paying out on you and they're saying, I'm so much better than you than this, you're like, good on you, mate. Like, so what? So that's one we use as well. But I was just thinking this week that, good on you. So like, I think Malik Hooker took on Jeff Hartman on Twitter, and it's like, good on you, mate. So what? Get stuffed. That's that one. And I think in the live chat, they're saying, do you know what Arnold Palmer drink is, Matty P? I don't know if I do, but he's a golfer, isn't he? Vodka Drink also brings up, there's a grapefruit soda called Squirt. We had some lollies like that, but they're like a fruit chew, and then they'd spit out the fruit juice and what have you. But yeah, I was surprised I got away with that one. Just have a look. What else have we got there in the live chat? Awesome. So yeah, we'll move on to the next word, and that is the word knackered. So, in Australia, we say this word quite a bit. I think Mark and I both say it. So we're going to go do the trivia bit again. So what does the word knackered mean? True or false? It means you're really, really tired. You've done a lot. Or does it mean you're doing a lot of DIY and stuff around the house? Dun, 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 dun. All right. I think I said true or false, and then I didn't tell you which one was true and which one was false. Let's try it A or B. But yeah, Ryan O'Toole has it in the live chat first. It's tired or wiped out. What a classic. I stuffed that one up. So the final one that I'm going to give you, and while I'm doing this one, if anyone's got, we're going to call it like the open slang. You can, so while I'm saying this next one, if you've got any Aussie questions that you've got, chuck them out to me, and I'll quickly address them after this next word. So just if you think of any of them, start typing away. Ryan O'Toole, before I say this one, Ryan O'Toole says true or false must work differently in Australia. Yeah, no, it's just more that I've got a lot to cover off in this week's show, and we're almost at halftime. All right, so the next word that I'm going to talk about is the word Sambo. So Sambo is a nickname that we give to anyone named Sam or Samuel. And usually it's a boy thing. It's not, a girl sort of thing like Samantha or Sammy. So we got Sambo. But Sambo is also the nickname we give to sandwiches. So now, and this is the interesting thing, like sandwiches in America, you start getting to, Primati Brothers, you start getting, more like, Subway sort of style things. Some even people call what we'd even call like a gourmet burger, a sandwich or whatever. But we call it Sambo. So that traditional bread, bit of meat in the middle, it might be salad sandwich, Vegemite Sambo, it doesn't get more Aussie than that. Peanut butter Sambo, would you like a sausage Sambo? That's probably the iconic Australian saying with Sambo. So, that's probably the one you can use the most. Now, before we chuck to the break, I'm going to have a quick look in the live chat and see if there are any other Aussie questions there. Thaddeus says, have you heard the term Toby mangled for when you've had too much to drink? I haven't. I've heard the word mangled. Actually, I think it was when I was off a couple of weeks back, and Mark had Jeffrey Benedict on, and he talked about cactus, and the words for cactus and tide and what have you. But cactus also is something that, where I sort of come from, or in Sydney, or, there's a lot of Australians that where you'd be saying someone like really hungover, they'd be absolutely cactus. So maybe Bad can rename one of the hangovers to cactus one week if the Steelers lose by a lot. Let's hope he doesn't have to do that one. I'm not going to answer vodka drinkers one because we can get in trouble for YouTube when it comes to the promotion side of things. And then I'm going to finally bring up Shield's question to close out part one of Steelers Touch Down Under. Shield says, I have a question. When you visited the US, have you noticed any interesting cultural differences? Yeah, there's like absolutely heaps. I think in terms of that perspective, I think one of the funniest was we say napkin, it's like serviette or like a Kleenex. And I remember when I went to the States the first time, and I was about, I think it was like 11 or 12 years old. And I went up to a cafe and I had like crap all over my face because they hadn't given us any serviettes or Kleenexes or tissues, whatever you want to call them. And I went to the guy and I'm like, can I have a napkin? And he's like, what's a napkin? And I'm like, we don't have no napkins. And I'm like, I'm like doing this over my face, and he's thinking I'm some like crazy kid, like I got a problem. We're at the airport. Actually we're heading back home, and then he's like, I was like, like a serviette, and he's like, serviette, and then I was like, like a Kleenex, and then he was like, oh, Kleenex. I was like, yeah, and then he gave me the Kleenex. So that was one of them. That was probably the early on ones. I think Australians talk really quickly. And I think I've been talking really quickly on today's show, actually. I feel like I've just been talking. Looking forward to that quick 3-second break coming up just to quickly get a drink. But, I think we talk a lot faster. We run a lot of our words. We have a lot of colloquialisms. I think they're probably the main things. And I think as well, actually, this is a good one. So when I went to my first Pittsburgh Steelers game against the Buffalo Bills, there was a couple of people in rows in front, and they were having a bit of a disagreement over, someone standing in front of the other person. And it actually was a bit of an issue because where we were sitting, I think we're about the 25, 30 yard line. We're about, I'd say like 18 rows from the front, really behind where all the Steelers players bench was. And this particular group kept standing up, which then meant people behind them had to stand up, which then meant people had behind them to stand up. And then the whole sort of area and section had to stand up. And that was a bit, I got to say, it got a bit ridiculous. We paid like several $100s per ticket to go, and Steeler Chick asks whether I'll be singing during the break. I will not be singing during the break. But anyway, so that made us all stand up. And I'm sort of like, it's a 3.5 hour game. It's week 15. It's cold. It's Pittsburgh. I don't really want to stand up for like 3.5 hours straight. Like, let's be ridiculous. Like, come on. And they got into a bit of a tiff. And, but it was very funny. It was very polite. There was no swearing, and the two people in the different groups were getting super angry. Like, I thought there might have been punch-ons or a biff, as we like to call it. There wasn't, and it was really polite. And I just sort of sat there to my fiance Jess, and we just were both saying to each other, if this was in Australia, the swearing would have started 3 seconds into that sort of exchange, and it would have got quite heated a lot more quickly. Not to say that would happen everywhere, and I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I mean, I saw a video the other day of a Rockies game against the Padres, and this guy got absolutely knocked out, straight out in that game. So in the stands, but I think it was just different. Like, Americans are a lot more, I do honestly think you're a lot more polite. I think particularly in some of the states that I've been really lucky to experience as well. So that's probably a couple of quick cultural differences. Chad quickly asked, and I do have to go to the break. I'm gonna get done by Brian Anthony Davis, our podcast producer, for going way over. But how does cost of living compare? So we have minimum wages that are a lot higher here, but our taxes are a lot higher as well. So that sort of feeds into it. Sydney and Melbourne, where the two sort of more populous states and are bigger, more economic states. Our house prices are comparative to New York or San Jose or California. It's very, very expensive. To get a 3-bedroom house within 20, 30 kilometers of our CBD center in Sydney, will cost you about 12 to 15 times the average annual wage. And that's a massive stress. And housing affordability, I know around the Western world is an issue, but it's particularly an issue in Australia. So that's pretty crazy. Alcohol's a lot more expensive. So like a bottle of Belvedere, 700, mils. I want to convert that to your system, but let's say the $29-ish bottle of Belvedere that you could go buy at most US bottle shops will cost you about $60, $70 here. There's basically on every sort of 700 mils of alcohol in Australia, there's like a $20 to $30 tax. So that's where cost of living is really expensive. So vodka drinker, you'd be pretty interested in that one there. But with that, we're going to take a break on Steelers Touchdown Under. Join us for part 2. We're going to look at the offense. We've already slung the slang, so then we're going to start with a bit of a game that I'm really keen to get you all enjoying and being part of there in the live chat, and I'll make sure it's digestible on the audio side. And then, of course, we'll obviously have Q&A, through that piece as well. So just stay with us, YouTube's listeners that are listening live right now. Just hold on for a couple of seconds, and we'll be right back. And we're back on Steelers Touchdown Under. I'm Matt Peverell, and I'm flying solo on today's show. And man, has it gone quickly. And I've been helped through by the live chat on this one, so we're really rolling. I think Mark and I have never gone longer than 37 minutes, so I'm going to get done for that one. But hey, it's awesome to be with you guys, and it's awesome to be part of, and be joined by all the BTSC family, on this Saturday afternoon, evening for you guys over there, and this Sunday morning, for me in the future. And of course, on the audio side, whenever you're listening to us, whether it's on your Monday, your Sunday, even your Tuesday, because, this rate, you're gonna have to listen to 2 shows that are almost as long as some of the single shows as well that aren't live YouTubes. So let's pick up on some of the discussion that we had in part 1, where we looked at goals for 2021 for the Steelers to go and go after that 7th Lombardi. So we covered the defense and what those goals need to be. We're going to be a bit quicker on the offensive side as well. So the first place that I really wanted to look at that really stood out to me in terms of things they can fix up is drops. Now, we know colloquially or anecdotally, DJ, Deontay Johnson, Ebron had some significant amount of drops last year. Even I think Claypool had a couple too, but, he's a rookie and, there was a lot being thrown into him, and he did a hell of a lot too. I think he only had 4 or 5 drops. So, I think it was actually 4 off the top of my head. And so, that's a bit more permissible. But Deontay Johnson had 13 drops from 144 targets. So, 144 divided by 12 is 12. So you can basically say that like on more. He had almost a drop every 12 passes. In fact, he had a drop, off less amounts of passes. Ebron dropped 7 off 91 passes, and there were 5 players with either 4 or more drops. Now, that needs to really be fixed. And I think the Canada offense and scheming people open and Big Ben, trusting his arm more, because you got to think like Big Ben throughout last season was testing his arm at every different point. And so, that would have sat there in the back of his mind. It doesn't matter that he's like an NFL veteran. He would have sat there like thinking every single time, is this gonna overdo it? So, and if he wasn't, I'm sure it wasn't like, in every second, but you can just think like throughout a game, he'd be thinking and managing that as well. So what I really want to see in 2021 is no one above 6. So Ebron, just cut one drop, will be good, mate. But I mean, you're going to have to do a bit more than that, or Freeman's going to take some of those targets. But I really think the goal needs to be, no one above 6 drops and only one player at 6 drops. We maybe there's a handful at that 3 or 4 mark, but we need to clean up those drops, because you think about that offense too through 11 games and what it was doing, and someone earlier in the live chat was basically saying, that the offense is actually better than the defense, so it's got more potential. Now, I think from the offensive perspective, and we'll get to this later on in terms of these goals with scoring points, you've got to be able to score points. You are not going to beat, a Seattle Seahawks, if it came to a Super Bowl, or, the Saints before. It's not going to be the Saints now, a Cardinals, or someone like that. You've got to have the great defense, but you've got to be able to score points. But to get there, you've got to get over teams like the Kansas City Chiefs, and you've got to be able to score points. You've got to be able to outscore Lamar if he's on fire. Baker Mayfield, the game opens up. We've got to be able to score 30 points there. And to do that, you can't afford drops, especially drops in the end zone, especially drops in the red zone, drops on 3rd down, drops when you're wide open. They're not excusable. It's like what I said before on defense with these tackles. You do that stuff, it really does cost. Everyone's human though. So, there are going to be some drops. I just think we need to cut that amount down. DJ, can he get 7? I want him, 6 or below. So if he can cut his by 50%, if Ebron can cut his by 50%, we'll be in a really good place. Now, the next part, and we talked a little about this on the defensive side of the football, and it was brought up, I think it was by Thaddeus, and that was around the rush yards. So we had 6 games over 100 rushing yards where the team achieved that, and we know we were one of the worst rush defenses in the league last year. And 5 of those were either in week 6 or before in 2020, and then there were 3 games with 80-plus rush yards. In 2021, when you've invested a first-round draft pick on a guy like Najee Harris, when you've got a Benny Snell who, yes, he's Benny no Jets, but hopefully we can scheme him open. When you've got things like your jet sweeps, when Jalen Samuels, who knows how to operate within a Canada offense, now it might not be this Canada offense, but at least he knows how to start planning and preparing for that. And apparently he's been looking pretty sharp in OTAs. You've got Anthony McFarland Jr. with a proper offseason as well. That's something that we should be able to achieve 12 games above 100, and 6 of those need to be above 150. Now, that will help us that will help our defense, as Cameron Haywood pointed out recently, when he was on Good Morning Football. And equally, the next goal that I want as part of that is time per drive to go up from 237 to 315. So I want it to go up almost 45 seconds per drive. That's really important. And that will come to the next goal that I have as well in terms of points per drive, because we need to be able to suck that clock down and force their offense into playing chasing football, because we've got the defense that can capitalize on that pressure as well. Now, I might pause there because there's a really interesting question from Vodka Drinker that I'm really quite passionate about on this one. So Vodka Drinker brings up, I have an NFL safety question for the narrator. Seeing how rugby guys usually don't wear helmets and do just as hard of tackling as the NFL, or harder, in my view, as an ex-rugby player, do you think that proper tackling is just a lost art? So this is an interesting one. There's a lot of good tackling in the NFL. I really like that they've cleaned it up with taking the helmet hits out, because I think that encouraged poor tackling. When you look at Shazier, and that was an awful, awful thing that happened, but we're always taught from literally the age of 6 right? And younger if your dad, takes you out the back as a bloke and teaches you how to do it. You want your shoulder, the way your shoulders are built to connect with the hip, right? And I'm doing hand gestures, so on the audio side, that might be really hard. But you want the shoulder to connect with the hip, and you can drive through. And then if you line that up on most people, even if they're bigger than you, so it might be lower. So if they're a really tall person, or a big, bigger guy, you want to hit them just above the knee, right? And this is the thing, and I'm one to preach on it. There were times when I was terrible at it, as I was going through my rugby career and progressing. But even the smallest person in the world, if you hit someone at the knee or below and you wrap your arms and you hold on tight, they might not fall down, but they can't go anywhere, so they at least have to pass the ball. Now, in the NFL, obviously, once the ball's been passed forward, you can't pass it again. So that's a really big deal. I see some great tackling in the NFL at times, but equally in rugby, there's rugby union and rugby league. Rugby league is quite poor tackling in my perspective. There's 4 or 5 people in on it, and it's more like wrestling people down. And versus rugby union, where you usually tackle quite low, and there's a lot being done at the moment in rugby league to bring those above the shoulder tackles down. So, look, it is an interesting question that Vodka Drinker brings up there. I do think it's becoming to a degree a lost art in a lot of sport, but the great thing is that as we start talking about CTE and concussions and what have you, it's got to come back, because really the amount of those injuries should be reduced if people are being hit, basically ribs or below. There's actually a really cool thing. If you go back, you can find it on YouTube. ESPN did the sports science piece, and there's one with Ray Lewis. Now, I know obviously as Steelers fans, we're going to have mixed feelings about Ray Lewis, but they talked about the power and the pressure, and they compared him to like a SWAT team bashing down a door with a bull rush, and how powerful his bull rush was. But in that segment, there's a bit where they talk about why quarterbacks, when they're hit by a player like a Ray Lewis, their body doesn't snap in half, and the flex that the human body has at the thorax and around the ribs as well. And we're basically built as humans to cop hits in that area and have that flex. It's pretty interesting stuff, actually. So, yeah, great question there, Vodka Drinker. Really, really like that one. So, moving back onto the offensive side of the goals, for 2021, average points per drive. I want to see an uplift from 2.12 in 2020 to 2.75 points. So really, we're almost averaging, that field goal per drive. I think that now that's really, really ambitious. I get that. But if we can even just tick over that 2.5 mark, I think you're going to see a real lift in terms of that will coincide with the Steelers' lift in offensive, in offensive football. And equally, we might have less drives if we're using more clock. That's where I'd like to see this more of the clock up because of the rushing. So that's where I like to see 2.75 or more. The next piece was average of 7+ plays per drive in 2021 versus 5.68 in 2020. If we are rushing the football for those, 12 times 100 yards and 6 of them over 150, in 2021, we should be getting 7 plays plus per drive. That needs to be really important. Again, it's about soaking up that clock. It's about dialing up that pressure that the opposing offense has got to have. Next one, score more than 475 points versus the 416 that we scored in 2020. Now, if you look at the difference, if you go through all the Steelers scores last season, if we'd scored 83 more points, we'd pretty much average above 30. So I'm suggesting, how do we get 59 or 60 yards more? So how do we get almost there? Now, we don't have to be quite there, because I don't mind if we're running out the clock, or we're by kneeling and just running the football at the end of games. But I think we've got to get much closer to that average of 30 than what we did in 2020. Now, Ryan O'Toole brings up a really, really important point here, and that is, Ben having a line that can buy in more than 2.3 seconds. That's critical. I mean, if you look at some of the best vertical throws across any of the quarterbacks, no matter what name they've got in the back of their jersey from last season in the NFL, one of the common things you're going to have with them is that there's several of those deep vertical passes or, massive gain plays where they're able to actually sit there and see the field. And Bill Cowher came out in the last couple of days. There's a great article on Behind the Steel Curtain that covers it and has the clip of it and talked about Ben being able to see the field. And that was one of the things that differentiated him in their mind, even though once he joined the Steelers, to Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers. You've got to give him that time. So I agree, Ryan O'Toole. That's really, really important. And hey, those seconds all contribute to more time per drive, and getting closer to that 3:15 mark that I'd suggested, a few moments ago. And then the final offensive goal that I think the Steelers need to think about is being ranked in the top 23 in all offense rankings while cutting rush defense to be in the top 10. Now, I put that rush defense in there from the perspective of, if we're in the top 23, and that includes, from the rushing on the offensive side of the football, if we can cut the opponent's, rush yards, rush time, and what have you, we are going to absolutely dial up that pressure. And I think that it's like with turnovers. Like sometimes you can sit there and go, what's the best stat line of the week? And it might be, Ben, 3 touchdowns, or it might be defense, 2 interceptions. I always look at the turnover rate. Right, as long as we're 2+ on the turnover side, that's a good game for me. If you're doing that, you're going a long way to winning games. Right, you're going a long way to winning games. So that's why I really want to see us in the top 23 for all rush defense. Also, cutting all the rush defensive rankings, because there are a few that are just outside the top 10. Let's bring them all to within the top 10 as well. Awesome. So we've now racked up. We're almost 15 or so minutes into part 2. So I want to kick off a fun segment for everyone. And, this is where you can definitely throw in all your questions and what have you. But I was sort of thinking, now, some people might sort of say, Matt, you came up with this because you like Madden. But I was thinking, let's say, and please, everyone stay with me here and don't need to get out the tissue boxes. It's just hypothetical. Imagine the Rooneys went broke. Imagine the Steelers were no longer. And so with that, Pittsburgh would still have a team, but the Steelers were going to be no longer. And it was, everyone agreed that, the Steelers had such a great history. Let's not, try and, create this new franchise on the Steelers that doesn't have that history with it. Let's retire that. Let's come up with a new team. It might be the Iron Men or the whatever it is. Who were that? Or alternatively, it might be, imagine if collective bargaining agreement, didn't get signed and there was a complete league redraft and every team could pick 8 players that would automatically come across on their current deals as part of the agreement with the NFLPA to stay with the team. Who are the 8 players, 4 on offense, 4 on defense, that you would pick to stick with the Pittsburgh Steelers? Now, I want to see everyone throw them into the live chat now. So we're going to start with offense first. The 4 players that I would be picking are Kevin Dotson, youngest offensive lineman that we've got that's, got more than a season under his belt. He's going to be a mainstay of the Pittsburgh Steelers as long as, we do well by him on contract when that comes up. Pat Freiermuth, because I think he's a great tight end and he offers us some support there. Chase Claypool, because again, as someone young, we've got him on a long-term deal. Imagine if, we were going to this season as well, we would have had him last season. We're going into the new collective bargaining agreement. We've got another 3 to 4 years of him left. Fantastic. And then I'd be picking Juju, because your quarterback's got to throw to someone. You need a bit of marketability as part of this new franchise. Get him on that long-term deal. So they're the 4 guys on offense that I'd be keeping. And so while I get other people, and there's a few questions going in, but if anyone else wants to throw in theirs, I might go over the 4 defensive guys that I'd be starting my new franchise with, or starting my new Steelers roster with. And that would be Devin Bush, because he's going to be one of the best inside linebackers in the league if he isn't already, this season. TJ Watt, you're not going to leave TJ Watt out, without a doubt. Minkah Fitzpatrick too, versatility in the secondary, even, if you needed him to, play more of a dime backer role or, sub package role if you really had to. Not sure he'd want to play there though, given the Miami stuff. And then it'd be Stephon Tuitt. Now that's a really hard one because you'd love to say Haywood, the tough veteran, but with Stephon Tuitt, you're getting a little bit younger at that position, someone that's proven. He's going to eat up a lot of contract. But, we can afford that when you look at the guys that I've pulled in that are a bit cheaper on rookie deals. So, you've got cap to go out and get some of the other players off the other teams, or bring back more of that Steelers roster if it was just the collective bargaining agreement, that hadn't gone, to plan and hadn't been signed. But yeah, that wraps up sort of my 8 players. But let's go to a few questions in the live chat here. Bad Itch brings up Steelers Chick 46. It will all be on the line outside of DeCastro. They have a total of 22 NFL starts, unless BJ, who plays 0 snaps last year. Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to see what they do with, BJ Finney and, Kendrick Green and all the rest of it. Snowman says, sorry, I'm late being out fishing. That's all right, Snowman. We're just doing the final few questions of the show, but it's just me this week. Mark is, unfortunately unwell, but that's all right. Everyone's, stayed with me for almost an hour now. So, it's been a fantastic show and I've really enjoyed it. Mark O'Malley. He says, Mark. So Mark's actually, he's at home. I'm Matt, but that's all right. Do you think we addressed enough on the O-line to run the ball, sustain drives, and control the clock when needed? I think the preseason is going to be the telling point to this. I think when it comes to the answer to that question, it's difficult. It's difficult to say, but I like, and you can go back and listen to the curtain call. They addressed this really well. I think it was not this week, but the week before, when they looked at, Buddy Johnson and Moore out of there, Dan Moore Jr., sorry. And I'm really excited for what Moore can do. I was excited before that podcast, so definitely I'm excited after that YouTube show and podcast as well. So I think that was really smart there. I really like Kendrick Green. I talked about him in War Room right before the draft. We then drafted him. He's going to surprise a lot of people. He's exactly what we needed. The question is going to be how long it takes these guys to adjust. So I think it's a question of when, not if, and so that's going to be the interesting piece as well. But I think that's when you're going to see more of the, I don't want to use the word cutesy sort of offense from Matt Canada, but you're going to see them try and scheme a few different, things and not gimmick plays, but just a few different things that I think get people open. So it's a much better experience, and there's pressure off that O-line there as well. Bad Itch says, Chooks is a liability on the O-line. He is, but he's not he's more of a pass protector than a, support in the run game. So I think that's the other thing is you've got to manage what that is and, whether they move some people around in that O-line for different plays. I think that's the thing that's going to be interesting. And then we've got a question from Awesome Stuff. Will still Steven Nelson get signed? Sorry, Awesome Stuff. I'll bring up your question. Steelers Chick said that. I don't think the Pittsburgh Steelers are bringing him back, and I wouldn't after what we talked about earlier in the show with 732 yards allowed. Sorry, Awesome Stuff. Going back to your question. Same questions before. What other NFL offenses do you think is similar to what Canada will have? That's a great question, and I don't want to give a cop-out answer to it, but, really, we don't know what Matt Canada is going to produce. This is the thing. We don't know. And I think this is whatever you see this season doesn't necessarily mean that's what you're going to see for the next few seasons. That depends if Big Ben's back or not. If Big Ben is, then you might see an evolution of it. But if he's not, then I think you'll see something different. So, yeah, that's a really great question. It's probably a better one for Jeffrey Benedict or KT Smith. But the key thing is that you look at a lot of quarterbacks around the league right now, and there's a lot of them that are now becoming that mobile, running quarterback as well. We're not going to get that in Ben. So I just think we'd like to see more play action. I'd like to see, a bit more movement around the pocket, but I don't say I couldn't even compare that to the way Stefanski, schemed Mayfield around in the last year, because we want Big Ben to be a lot better than Baker Mayfield, and equally Big Ben doesn't necessarily move around like Baker Mayfield. So that's a really tough one. But I think that's one of the great things. That's one of the great things we can watch and see. But yeah, I think training camp will give us a better insight as well. Training camp and preseason. I think OTAs, it's sort of hard at this point to sort of determine what that might look like. And equally, whatever we see the team do necessarily might be a bit different, in once we actually come to the season versus what they have in that preseason. Okay, jumping down is before we wrap up the show. Let's bring it up here. Michael O'Malley again, GC split back set with Harrison McFarlane. I think it's going to be about what sort of plays that, and this goes back to what the question you had earlier there around Matt Canada. I don't think it's going to be completely the split carries, but a split back set with Harrison McFarlane, I can imagine so. And the reason I say that is just because I think it's a possibility, given that I'm not sure Derek Watt at fullback's really doing a hell of a lot. So yeah, let's move on to Vodka Trinker. Says, I would a split back set with either one of them, motion them out of the backfield and tip the coverage to Ben. Well, this is it, right? This is if you do a split set with them, you can really make sure that you can scheme Najee open, and equally then you can also do a running back or halfback draw from it as well. And a halfback draw with McFarlane behind it with his sort of pace. I'm really interested to see what that does. And I can't say for sure whether a lot of that happened in college or not. I need to go back and look at it, but he did seem to run into a lot of gaps, when he was playing, college football. And Snowman with a super chat, which I think will pretty much close out this week's show. There. Sorry, the clicking on my computer is super sensitive. Who is your dark horse to make the team in 2021? Well, it depends how high you're on Shakur Brown. I think Shakur Brown's going to make the team. I'm interested to see what we can do with him over James Pierre, to be honest. I know I talked about that a little bit this week on War Room, but that is my honest answer there, and from that perspective. And from the wide receiver part as well, I think Rico Bussey. I know everyone's quite high on Ray, but I think Rico Bussey should be given a shot. I like what he can do. I liked what he did in the college game. I thought the fact that we could get him, undrafted was pretty lucky. I think, it would have been fair to spend a 6th round pick on him. So yeah, they're 2 guys. So you get 2 for 1 there, Snowman. And then we might just have one more. Do you think TJ will be Defensive Player of the Year quality without Dupree? Yeah, I do. I think given what Tuitt did last year, teams are going to have to really consider that. Hayward will come back with a vengeance. You've got Alu back. Guys like, and this is interesting, I think a guy like Isaiah Loudermilk is such a big body that he's going to command a lot, particularly if we're watching, O-line guys, younger O-line guys that, we're versing, and less experienced guys. I think they're going to be really worried about that potentially. And equally, fine. If they go after TJ, and that affects his defensive player of the year quality, then Highsmith is going to be more open. And at the end of the day, this is about the team. I think TJ would trade any defensive player of the year award for a Super Bowl or even an AFC championship appearance. So that's the thing. This is about the team in the 7th Lombardi chase, not the individual awards. But there's also the 17th game, and he's not been playing the 16th game in the last couple of years. So you add 2 games, you get him to play all of them, you manage his snaps, the referees call holding penalties. I can't see how he wouldn't be. And the other thing about TJ that's really important to remember is that every single year that he's been in the league, he's gotten better. He's not even just stagnated. He's gotten better. And I think that's like a really key part when you think about him this season, because he will go away and work even harder. You saw him, and do you go back and watch like his post-game press conference after the wild card round, I think it was? You could tell how dejected he was that the season was over. Like, he was genuinely quite shocked. And I think so for him, he realizes he's that future captain on offense. And technically he's in a contract year. And we know what happens when players are in a contract year. Bud Dupree showed it. Live Bell showed it. Players step up. So I'm excited. If I'm over any other teams in the league, I'm actually really scared about that prospect, though. But look, with that, we're going to wrap it up. That's this week's Steelers Touch Down Under. I'm Matt Peverell. Missed my co-host Mark Davison this week, but thank you for sticking with me those listening live on YouTube. Whether you're on YouTube or Facebook. Sorry, I meant to say Facebook. They had to pause my brain there. I was going to say also the audio side as well. Thanks for sticking with us for a really long part 1 and joining us for part 2. If you for some reason listen to part 2 and you didn't listen to part 1, go back and listen to it. We've got some awesome things coming up. So stay tuned for a lot of those. Have a great weekend, or have a great week if you're listening to this a couple of days later. And as always, go Steelers.